The sound was wrong. That was the first thing. At 6:42 a.m., the only sounds I should hear are the drip of the coffee maker and the distant chittering of sparrows in the old oak tree. Instead, I heard the low grumble of a diesel engine and the rhythmic clank of metal on concrete. It was a sound of construction, a sound of work, a sound that had no business being on my property at sunrise on a Tuesday. I stood at my kitchen window, my favorite ceramic mug, the one Eleanor gave me for our 20th anniversary, warm in my hands. Through the steam rising from the black coffee, I saw them. 3 men in dusty jeans and fluorescent yellow vests were unloading concrete blocks from a flatbed truck. And standing there, directing them with the imperious point of a freshly manicured finger, was Brenda Vickers. She had a clipboard. Of course she had a clipboard. It was her scepter of imagined authority. They were on my driveway. Not near it. Not adjacent to it. They were standing squarely on the asphalt that I had paid to have sealed just last summer. The same asphalt that led from the quiet county road directly to my 2-car garage. And they were building a wall. A low, ugly, cinder block wall right across the mouth of my drive. I watched as the first block was set in a bed of wet mortar, its gray, pockmarked face a brutalist insult to the morning. Brenda gestured, and a second block was laid beside it. She was beaming, a thin, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She looked like a pharaoh overseeing the construction of a particularly petty pyramid. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was still too hot, and it scalded my tongue. I didn't care. The small, sharp pain was a welcome anchor in the sea of disbelief that was threatening to rise. I set the mug down on the granite countertop, the click of ceramic on stone unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I walked to the hall closet, retrieved my phone, and returned to the window. I began recording. I didn't zoom in. I wanted the wide shot. I wanted the context, the morning light, the dew on the grass, my rose bushes just beginning to bloom, and the slow, methodical erection of a barrier designed to imprison me in my own home. After a few minutes of silent documentation, I slid the glass door open and stepped out onto my back patio. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and diesel fumes. Brenda's head snapped in my direction, her smile widening. It was a predatory expression, one that anticipated a confrontation. She was certain she would win. She had been waiting for me to appear. This was all part of the performance. "A morning, Arthur," she called out, her voice dripping with false cheerfulness. Finally awake, are we?" "We're just making some necessary community improvements," I didn't answer. I just stood there on my own patio, phone held steady, recording her. The men paused, looking from her to me, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They were just workers, paid for a job. They didn't know the history. They didn't know the file. This is HOA property. "Arthur," she continued, taking a few steps toward me, her voice hardening. She was moving from the performative neighbor phase to the authoritarian president phase. This access point is being closed. ETA, a JASA liability. The board voted, ECHA's official. I remained silent. I let her talk. I have learned over a long career that when people are in the process of making a catastrophic mistake, the best thing you can do is give them the space to complete it. Every word she spoke was a gift. Every word was another entry for the record. You will be receiving a notice of the fine for the unauthorized driveway connection, she said, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. And if you try to interfere with this crew, I will call the sheriff. They are authorized contractors performing official HOA business. This is Lakeside Meadows property, and I am Brenda Vickers, the president of the board. You need to go back inside. I lowered my phone slightly, but I kept it recording. I looked at the half-finished wall, now 2 blocks high and stretching halfway across my drive. I looked at the wet mortar, the stack of gray blocks, the faces of the workers who were now trying very hard to look busy elsewhere. Then I looked back at her, at the absolute, unshakable confidence in her eyes. The confidence of someone who believes their own narrative is more powerful than recorded deeds, surveyed property lines, and county law. She was standing on my land, blocking my legal access, and threatening me with the law. The irony was so dense, it was almost tangible. She had no idea. She had no idea about the file I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk, the one labeled simply, "Ah." She had no idea about the certified letters she had ignored, the registered plats I had copies of, or the hours I had spent at the county recorder's office. She had no idea who I was before I retired, what I did for 40 years, or the specific, intimate knowledge I possessed about the very ground she was standing on. She saw a quiet old man, a widower who kept to himself, an easy target. She had no idea she wasn't just building a wall across my driveway. She was building her own cage and handing me the only key. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how we got here. It's important to understand the foundation of the thing. A structure is only as sound as the ground it was built on, and Brenda's entire world was built on. Uncompacted fill. I am a civil engineer by trade. Retired now for 5 years. For 42 years. I worked for one of the largest land development firms in the state. My specialty was hydrology and infrastructure planning. I designed drainage systems, graded subdivisions, and navigated the labyrinth of municipal and county regulations that govern every square inch of developed land. I wrote easements. I interpreted plats. I spent more time with deeds, surveys, and legal descriptions than I did with novels. My job was to understand the rules, the written, recorded, legally binding rules that lie unseen beneath the grass and asphalt of our daily lives. I was good at it. I was meticulous. My wife, Eleanor, used to joke that I could find a surveyor's pin from 1890 blindfolded. She wasn't far off. Eleanor passed away 3 years ago. We bought this house together, the first and only house we ever owned. It is a modest, single-story ranch on a 3/4-acre lot at the very edge of the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. It was the quiet that sold us. Our property backs up to a protected wetland, and the house is at the end of a long driveway off the main county road. We were technically part of the HOA, but we were geographically separate. The main subdivision, a loop of about 60 houses, is a 1/4 mile down the road, accessible through a grand stone entryway. My driveway was the original access to the old farmhouse that stood here before the development was built in the late 1982. When the developer laid out the subdivision, he left my lot as a separate parcel with its own direct access to the county road. It was grandfathered in. On paper, it was as clear as day. My property line runs along the county road for 200 feet. The driveway is entirely, indisputably, mine. For years, life was peaceful. The HOA was a benign entity that mostly concerned itself with the community pool and landscaping the front entrance. The dues were reasonable. We paid them. We received newsletters. It was fine. Then, 4 years ago, Brenda Vickers and her husband moved in. She was a force of nature from the start. She had opinions on everything: the shade of beige, your trim was painted, the number of decorative gnomes in your garden, the precise day of the week your trash cans should be brought in. She saw the HOA not as a service organization, as a kingdom, and she was destined to be its queen. She got herself elected to the board within a year, and president a year after that, and that is when the trouble started. It was small at first, a flurry of violation notices for things that had been ignored for 20 years. Mr. Henderson, 2 doors down from her, got a $200 fine because his basketball hoop was allegedly an inch too close to the sidewalk. The Garcias were cited for having a political sign in their yard 2 days after the election. It was petty, vindictive, and all couched in the language of preserving property values. Brenda had a knack for making her personal preferences sound like codified law. She held court at the community pool, surrounded by a small clique of supporters who enjoyed the drama and the feeling of being on the right side of her arbitrary authority. I stayed out of it. My property was isolated, and my life was quiet. After Eleanor died, quiet was all I wanted. I paid my dues on time. I kept my lawn mowed. I didn't have any gnomes. I thought I was immune. That was my mistake. My first interaction with her was about 18 months ago. Shade sent me a formal-looking letter demanding that I remove the small vegetable garden Eleanor had planted near the back of our property. It was, she claimed, a violation of the covenants that prohibited a agricultural use. I knew for a fact it wasn't. I had read the covenants, all 112 pages of them, before we bought the house. They prohibited commercial farming and livestock. A 10 by 20 foot plot of tomatoes and zucchini was not that. I could have fought it. I could have sent her a letter citing the exact article and section of the covenants. But I was tired. The grief was still a heavy coat. I couldn't take off. Arguing about tomatoes felt like a monumental waste of the little energy I had, so I just let the garden go. I did not tear it out. I just stopped tending it. The weeds took over. It was a small, quiet surrender. And in that surrender, Brenda smelled blood. Her next target was the driveway. For years, the HOA's lawn maintenance crew had used the top of my driveway to turn their large riding mowers around. It was easier than trying to make a 3-point turn on the narrow strip of grass by the main road. The original crew, a local guy named Dave, had asked my permission 20 years ago. I said, of course. It was a neighborly thing to do. It cost me nothing. But Dave retired, and the HOA hired a big, faceless commercial service. They continued the practice. I didn't mind. But Brenda saw it differently. In her mind, that historic use had somehow transformed my private property into a common area. She started referring to it as the HOA access point. That is, when I started the folder. It was an old habit from my engineering days. When you sense a conflict brewing, you don't argue. You document. I bought a simple manila folder and a label maker. I printed a HOA on a white strip and affixed it to the tab. The first thing that went in was her letter about the garden. The second was a photograph I took of the lawn crew, using my driveway, with a note of the date and time. I started a log. Every email, every newsletter, every piece of communication from the HOA went into that folder. When she sent a community-wide email, reminding everyone that the access point by my property was for authorized personnel only, I printed it out and added it to the file. I kept the receipts on paper. She was building a narrative, brick by brick, that my property was hers to control. I was building a case file, document by document, that proved it was not. I knew where this was going. Her ambition and my property lines were on a collision course. I just didn't know she would be brazen enough to try and build a literal wall. The catalyst, I later learned, was my honeymoon, or rather, what she thought was a honeymoon. I had reconnected with an old friend, a wonderful woman named Sarah, whose husband had also passed away. We found a gentle, quiet companionship in each other. We decided to take a 2-week trip to the coast. I put a hold on my mail. I arranged for a neighbor to watch the house, and Brenda, ever the observant vulture, noticed my absence. An empty house, in her mind, was an opportunity. This was her chance to solidify her claim, to create a permanent fact on the ground. She must have called an emergency board meeting, spun a tale of liability and insurance, and gotten her cronies to approve the expenditure for the wall. She thought I would come home, defeated, to a fait accompli, she thought I would yell or threaten to sue. And she would meet that with the full self-righteous force of the HOA. What did she think was going to happen? That I would just accept it. That I would sell my house. She had no idea. So there I was, back on my patio, the recording still running. Brenda had her hands on her hips now, her face a mask of indignation at my silence. "Are you going to be a problem, Arthur?" she asked, her voice low and threatening. I finally spoke. My voice was calm, measured. "Brenda," I said, and her name hung in the air between us. "You are trespassing on my private property. These men are trespassing on my private property. You are illegally obstructing my legal right of egress and ingress. You have until noon today to remove these men, their equipment, and every single one of these blocks. If you fail to do so, I will take appropriate action." She laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Your property, Arthur. This has been HOA access for 20 years. It is on the plat," she lied, gesturing vaguely. "The board has declared it so. You cannot stop this." "It is done." I didn't argue the point. There's no sense arguing facts with someone who doesn't believe in them. I just gave a small, slow nod. "I see," I said at noon. "You have until noon." Then I turned, walked back into my house, and slid the glass door shut. I locked it. I walked back to my desk, the one in the spare bedroom that used to be Eleanor's craft room. I sat down in my comfortable leather chair, took a deep breath, and pulled open the bottom drawer. I lifted out the folder. It was thick now, almost 2 inches. I set it on the desk, its weight solid and reassuring. The first phase observation was over. It was time to get to work. The first thing I did was not what she expected. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. Calling them at this stage would just create a messy, inconclusive, she said, a situation. The wall was only a few blocks high. A deputy would look at it, look at her, look at me, and tell us it was a civil matter. That wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't to win an argument. The goal was to achieve a final, indisputable resolution. The goal was to dismantle her authority so completely that she could never trouble me or any of my neighbors ever again. And for that, I needed more than a single act of aggression. I needed a pattern. I needed a case. My first call was to a title company. I spoke to a woman named Maria, whose voice was competent and blessedly devoid of drama. I ordered a full title report for my property and for the HOA's common areas. I already had my deed and the original subdivision plat, but I wanted a fresh certified report that would show the entire chain of title, every easement, every covenant, every lien recorded against both properties since they were first parceled out. I paid for an expedited service. She promised it would be in my inbox by the end of the day. $185. I kept the receipt. My second call was to Alex. Alex was a young surveyor I had mentored during his last 2 years at the university. He was bright, ambitious, and a wizard with modern surveying technology, GPS, lidar, the works. He'd started his own small firm a few years back. "Arthur, good to hear from you." "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice cheerful. "Alex, I have a project for you," I said. My tone, all business, a boundary and improvement survey. I need it done today. I need it certified. And I need you to be prepared to testify to its accuracy in court, if necessary. There was a pause. Okay," he said, his voice now serious. This sounds significant. What are we staking?" My entire property line," I said. Every corner, every boundary. I want pink flags on every marker. And I want a detailed topographic survey of the front portion of my lot, including the driveway and the adjacent HOA common area. I want every man-made improvement located and identified. Every curb, every light post, every a wall, he asked. A new wall, I confirmed, currently under construction. On my driveway. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, he said, oh, I see. One of those situations. Arthur, I am booked for the next 2 weeks. I will pay you triple your normal rate, plus a bonus for a same-day report, I said without hesitation. I'll buy you and your crew the best steak dinner in town. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him clicking on a keyboard. I can move the Miller job to tomorrow morning, he said finally. There. Just staking a fence. They understand. I can be there by 10 a.m. Does that work? Perfect, I said. Alexa, be prepared for a hostile property owner, the president of my HOA. She believes she owns my driveway, he chuckled. A dry, knowing sound. Arthur, half my job is dealing with hostile property owners who think their fence is the property line because it has been there for 30 years. I'll handle it. See you at 10. I hung up and felt a small measure of calm settle over me. This was the process. This was the familiar, comforting rhythm of methodical preparation. While Brenda was building her little wall of spite out of concrete and mortar, I was building my case out of certified documents and verifiable data. Hers was a temporary physical structure. Mine would be permanent and legally indestructible. At precisely noon, the wall was complete. It was about 3 feet high, 100 feet long, and stretched from one side of my driveway to the other, completely blocking it. The workers had even put flat capstones on top. It was, I had to admit, a professionally constructed wall. It was also a criminal act. The crew packed up their tools and drove away, leaving Brenda standing there, admiring her work. She took a picture with her phone, probably to post on the HOA's Facebook page as a warning to other would-be dissenters. I watched her from my office window. She had no idea she had just provided me with Exhibit A. Next I took my own pictures, dozens of them. Close-ups of the mortar joints. Wide shots showing the wall in relation to my house and the road. I used a telephoto lens to get a clear shot of Brenda standing beside it, a triumphant look on her face. Then I sat back down at my desk. The time for my polite warning had passed. Now, it was time for the formal, on-the-record demand. I drafted a letter. It was none, but every word was chosen with care. It was addressed to a Brenda Vickers, in her official capacity as president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association, and in her personal capacity. That was important. I wanted to make it clear that I would be holding her personally liable as well. The letter cited the specific parcel number of my property. It stated that as of 6:42 a.m. that morning, the HOA, under her direct supervision, had trespassed and erected a permanent structure that completely and illegally obstructed my deeded access to my property. It referenced the state statutes regarding criminal trespass and damage to property. It demanded the immediate and complete removal of the wall within 24 hours. It stated that failure to comply would result in my seeking immediate injunctive relief from the court, as well as damages for the cost of removal, my legal fees, and punitive damages for the willful and malicious nature of her actions. I printed 2 copies. One I would send to the HOA's official address via certified mail. Return receipt requested. The other was for her. I walked out my front door, the door I rarely used, as it faced the main subdivision loop, and took a stroll down the street to her house. It was exactly as you'd expect. Immaculate lawn, aggressively pruned hedges, and a large, ostentatious fountain in the front yard. A small sign near the door read, "Ah, the Vickers." I rang the doorbell. She opened it, a surprised look on her face that quickly curdled into a sneer when she saw it was me. "Oh, what do you want, Arthur?" I held out the envelope. This is a formal notice," I said calmly. "I am serving it to you now. It outlines your legal jeopardy and gives you 24 hours to remedy the illegal structure you have built on my property." She snatched the letter from my hand. Without even opening it, she tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to her doormat. "I don't take orders from you, you old fool," she hissed. "That wall is permanent. Get used to parking on the street, thank you," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Thank you for what?" "For confirming receipt of the notice, and for providing me with another piece of evidence demonstrating your bad faith," I said. I had been recording the entire exchange with my phone in my shirt pocket. "Have a good afternoon, Brenda." I turned and walked away, leaving her sputtering on her doorstep. As I walked back to my house, I saw Alexa's truck pulling up. Perfect timing. The survey crew got to work immediately, a ballet of high-tech equipment and quiet professionalism. They set up the total station on a tripod, planted temporary markers, and began taking shots. As expected, it didn't take long for Brenda to notice. She marched over, clipboard in hand, ready for battle. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded of Alex. "You are on HOA property. You need to leave immediately." Alex, to his credit, didn't even look up from his data collector. We've been retained by the owner of Parcel 7B4 to conduct a boundary survey. We are operating under his authority and within the legal right of entry for licensed surveyors in this state. If you interfere with our work, I'll be forced to call the sheriff's department." He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it completely deflated her. She was used to emotional reactions, to arguments she could win through sheer volume. Procedural professionalism was a language she didn't speak. She just stood there, fuming, as the crew continued to work, placing bright pink flags along the indisputable, legally recorded line that separated my property from hers. One flag went in the grass about 5 feet on her side of the new wall. Another went in on the other end, also 5 feet on her side. The entire wall, every inch of it, was planted squarely, brazenly, on my land. Later that afternoon, the title report from Maria arrived in my inbox. It was a dense 150-page PDF, and I read every single word. It confirmed everything I already knew. My chain of title was clean, my access was deeded and exclusive. But then, on page 87, I found something. Something I had forgotten about, something that had been recorded 30 years ago and had lain dormant ever since. It was an easement, a drainage easement. When the developer built the main subdivision loop, he had a problem. The natural flow of rainwater was from the new street, across the parcel that would become mine, and into the wetlands. To handle the storm runoff from the new road and the 30 houses on the west side of the loop, he had to install a large, 36-inch corrugated metal pipe. That pipe ran from a storm drain on the main loop, cut diagonally across the corner of my future property, and discharged into the wetland. To do this legally, he had to record a drainage easement. I was reading that easement now. It was a standard form, but with one very specific, very interesting clause. The easement was granted to the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association in perpetuity for the sole purpose of stormwater conveyance. But it contained a covenant of quiet enjoyment and a non-obstruction clause. It explicitly stated that the grantor of my property was guaranteed unfettered vehicle access along the existing driveway, and that if the grantee of the HOA should ever hinder, obstruct, or otherwise impede that access, the grantor had the right to terminate the easement with 30 days or written notice. And if the easement were terminated, the grantor had the right to remove or permanently seal the conveyance pipe at the property line, at the HOA expense. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The developer, a smart man, had put this clause in to protect the value of the farmhouse parcel he was planning to sell. He wanted to make sure the future HOA couldn't bully the homeowner. It was a poison pill, a legal time bomb, and Brenda had just armed it. She had no idea. She thought she was blocking my driveway. In reality, she was threatening to flood her own kingdom. She had just handed me the biggest piece of leverage imaginable. The wall was not just an inconvenience anymore. It was the key to solving every problem she had ever created. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Bob. I said, "I think it's time we had a chat, and you are going to want to see this." My lawyer, Bob Stern, was the opposite of me in many ways. He was loud, gregarious, and enjoyed the theater of the courtroom. But underneath that bluff exterior, he was as meticulous as I was. We had worked together on dozens of development projects over the years. He handled the legal language. I handled the engineering realities. We were a good team. I forwarded him the entire folder, the photos, the video of my confrontation with Brenda, the audio of her tearing up my notice, Alexa's newly certified survey plat, the title report, and a highlighted copy of the drainage easement. I followed up with a phone call. Arthur, my friend," he boomed into the phone. This is not a file. This is a masterpiece. It is the most open and shut case of willful property, destruction, and tortious interference I have seen in a decade. This woman, what is her name, Brenda? She's a walking liability. I know, I said. But I don't just want to win, Bob. I want this to be over, permanently. For me and for my neighbors. Oh, it'll be over, he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. That drainage easement, Arthur, that is not a smoking gun. That is a nuclear weapon. She's not only violated your property rights, she's breached a 30-year-old covenant that is essential to the subdivision's existence. If you seal that pipe, the entire west side of their street becomes a retention pond every time it rains. The county will have them declared a public nuisance. The potential damages are staggering. So what is our next move? I asked. We play it by the book, Bob said. First, we file for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction to have the wall removed. But we don't file it just yet. We wait. You said she called an emergency meeting to get this approved? That is what I suspect, I said. Good. Let her have her meeting. Let her get the entire board on record supporting this. Let her get her supporters all riled up. We want them all tied to this decision. Then, we strike. But first, they ask the matter of the authority figure. I knew what he meant. Brenda's favorite threat was to call the sheriff. It was time to defuse that threat. The next morning I parked my car on the county road just outside my now walled-off driveway. I had to walk the last 100 feet to my own front door. It was a calculated inconvenience. I wanted a record of the obstruction. As I was getting my mail, Brenda drove by in her oversized SUV. She slowed down her window, and smirked, enjoying the walk. Arthur, she sneered, and then sped off. I just nodded to myself. Another data point. Later that day, I was in my front yard, trimming the rose bushes near the road. I was expecting her. Sure enough, her car pulled up, and she got out, phone in hand. "What are you doing?" she demanded, filming me gardening. I replied calmly, not looking up from a particularly stubborn weed. "You're too close to the HOA common area," she declared. "This is harassment. You are trying to intimidate me." It was absurd. I was on my own property, dozens of feet from her, pulling weeds. But I knew what this was. This was the prelude. This was her manufacturing a confrontation. so she could play the victim. Brenda, I am on my own property. Please leave me alone. I am the president of this association, and I am inspecting common property," she shrieked, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch. "You are threatening me. I am calling the police." "Ah, that is your right," I said, and I went back to my weeding. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. 2 deputies got out. One was older, with a weary look that said he'd seen it all. The other was younger, sharp-eyed, and observant. Brenda immediately launched into her performance. She was practically in tears, clutching her chest, explaining how she, a dedicated community volunteer, was being harassed and intimidated by this man, she pointed at me, he's been stalking me. He's trying to undo the board's decision about the safety wall. I fear for my safety, the older deputy sighed. He turned to me, Sir, what is your side of this? I put down my gardening shears and walked over, being careful to stay on my side of the pink survey flags. Good afternoon, officers, I said politely. My name is Arthur Finch. I am the owner of this property. This woman, Brenda Vickers, has been the one harassing me. Yesterday she directed a crew to build an illegal wall across my driveway, which you can see right there. I pointed to the wall. I was in my yard on my property. Gardening, she approached me and began shouting. I believe your body cameras will confirm that I did not approach her, raise my voice, or threaten her in any way. The younger deputy's eyes flicked from me to Brenda, then to the wall, then to the pink survey flags that clearly showed the wall was on my side of the line. I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He saw the setup. Mom. The older deputy said to Brenda, his voice tired. Is this your wall? It is the HOA's wall, she insisted. For safety. It is on our property. I held up a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of Alexis survey plat, officer. This is a certified survey map, filed with the county this morning. It shows the legal property line. As you can see, that wall is located entirely on my parcel. That makes this a matter of criminal trespass and destruction of property. The deputy took the paper and looked at it. He looked at the wall again. He looked at Brenda, whose face was turning a blotchy red. Mom, this appears to be a civil dispute over a property line. It is not a dispute, she screeched. It's ours. Fita, I said calmly, interrupting her tirade. I understand you cannot resolve a civil matter. However, Ms. Vickers has made a false report, claiming I was harassing and threatening her. I would like to press charges for that. And I would like to file a formal report for the destruction of my property. I have video evidence of Ms. Vickers supervising the construction, as well as a recording of her admitting to it and refusing to remove it. The older deputy's eyes widened slightly. This had just escalated from a routine neighbor squabble to something with actual evidence. The younger deputy took a step forward. Sir, you have video? Yes, I said, and I would like to make a formal statement on the record for your report. My statement is this. Brenda Vickers, president of the Lakeside Meadows HOA, has knowingly and willfully trespassed on my property, caused significant damage by constructing an illegal barrier, and has now made a false police report to further harass me. I am requesting a full investigation. Après. Brenda was speechless. Her script had not accounted for this. She expected the police to tell me to leave her alone. She did not expect me to calmly and methodically build a criminal case against her, right in front of them. The deputies exchanged a look. The older one turned to Brenda. Mom, I think you need to go home. And we're going to take Mr. Finch's statement, but he threatened me. She stammered, her performance crumbling. We have it on camera, Mama, the younger deputy said, his voice flat. Just go home." Defeated, she scurried back to her car and drove away. I spent the next 30 minutes giving a detailed, factual statement to the deputies. I showed them the video on my phone. I gave them a copy of the survey. I gave them the case number for the report I was filing. When they left, the younger deputy gave me a small nod. It was a nod of respect. I had followed the rules. I had the documentation. I had won the first battle, and it was all on paper. The police report was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It officially documented the conflict, and my version of events, corroborated by the survey and the officer's own observations. It transformed Brenda's actions from a mere dispute into a potential criminal matter. But I knew this was far from over. Brenda was not the type to retreat. She would double down, and that's exactly what I wanted. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Mr. Henderson, the man who'd been fined for his basketball hoop. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Mr. Finch? Arthur? It is George Henderson from down the street. I saw the police at your house today. And I saw the wall. I wanted to say thank you for standing up to her. There is nothing to thank me for yet, George, I said. But I appreciate the call. No, you don't understand, he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. She's been bullying this neighborhood for years. We've all been too scared to do anything. She threatens people with lawyers and liens. Most of us are retired on fixed incomes. We can't afford to fight her. He paused. I might have something that could help you. And something from before she took over, my interest was piqued. What is it, George? My wife. She was the board secretary for years, back when it was just a neighborhood group. You know, before Brenda. She kept all the old records. After she passed, I just packed them in a box. I think I have the original developer's plans for the whole subdivision. The big ones, the blueprints. I remember there was something about that drainage pipe. The developer, Mr. Renta Thompson. He came to a meeting once, way back, and explained it. This was a potential gold mine. The official recorded plat was one thing. The developer's own working plans and his testimony at a meeting could provide context and intent that would be incredibly powerful. George. Would you be willing to let me see those plans? Y'all do better, he said, his voice firm, now. Y'all bring them over. And I'll sign an affidavit about what Mr. Thompson said at that meeting. 8 a.m.'s time, someone put a stop to her. An hour later, George Henderson was at my front door with a dusty cardboard box. We sat at my dining room table, and he carefully unrolled a set of old, yellowed blueprints. And there it was, in faded blue ink. A detailed drawing of the storm drain system. And in the notes section, a handwritten annotation by the developer himself. A drainage easement through Parcel 7, before is conditional upon perpetual, unimpeded 24, access easement for said parcel. See, Covenant Sec. 4b. It was the smoking Goonaw's older, more authoritative sibling. It showed the original intent, clear as day. George recounted the meeting from almost 30 years ago, how the developer had explained that the farmhouse owner could never be blocked from the main road, because it was his only access. It was a condition of the whole system working. While George was writing out his affidavit, my email pinged. It was from a sender I did know. With the subject line HOA meeting. I opened it cautiously. The email was brief. You didn't hear this from me. Wall. Be prepared, attached was a PDF. It was the minutes from the emergency board meeting Brenda had held while I was away. The sender was anonymous, but I had a strong suspicion it was Carol, a board member who had seemed increasingly uncomfortable with Brenda's tyranny. The minutes were damning. They showed that Brenda had called the meeting with less than 24 hours notice, a violation of the bylaws. They showed that she had presented the wall as an urgent safety issue, claiming there had been several near-miss accidents involving the lawn crew and traffic on the county road. Complete fabrication. She had railroaded the vote, with her two cronies on the board voting yes, and Carol abstaining. The minutes also included a motion to fine me $5,000 for the unauthorized encroachment of my driveway, and to place a lien on my property if I didn't pay. It was all there, a perfect record of her conspiracy and bad faith. I now had a fearful ally in George and a disillusioned insider in Carol. The coalition was forming. The final piece of the pre-confrontation puzzle fell into place the next day. Brenda, now backed into a corner and facing a police investigation, made her last desperate move. At 9 p.m., a process server knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope. It was a temporary restraining order. Brenda had filed it that afternoon, claiming I was a threat to her safety. It was filled with outrageous lies. That I had been aggressively spying on her, that I had lunged at her during our conversation at her door, that my surveying activity was a form of intimidation. The order, granted ex parte without me present, forbade me from coming within 100 yards of her and, ridiculously, from using survey equipment or cameras in a harassing manner. It also set a hearing date for 1 week later, where a judge would decide whether to make the order permanent. She thought this would stop me. She thought a judge's order would neutralize me and give her time to fortify her position. She had no idea she had just made the single greatest tactical error of the entire conflict. She had taken our dispute out of the hands of the HOA and placed it directly into a court of law, a venue where clipboards and emotional performances mean nothing, and evidence means everything. She had just voluntarily walked into the one room where I was guaranteed to win. I immediately called Bob. She got a TRO, I said. I could hear him grinning through the phone. Oh, she is a gift that keeps on giving, he laughed. This is perfect. We don't even have to file our own suit now. We just turn up to her hearing and present our case. Itaz, faster, cheaper, and much more humiliating for her. Arthur, get a good night's sleep. Next week we go to court, and we are going to dismantle her, piece by piece. Each of the week leading up to the hearing was one of quiet, intense preparation. Bob and I met several times. We assembled our exhibits into 3 large binders, tabbed and indexed. Binder 1 contained the core property, documents my deed, the certified survey, the title report, the original subdivision plat. Binder 2 contained the history of the conflict. Copies of Brenda's letters, my certified mail receipts, photos of the wall, the video and audio recordings, the police report. Binder 3 was the bombshell. The drainage easement, the developer's blueprints from George's signed affidavit, and the leaked minutes from the secret HOA meeting. We had a narrative backed by unimpeachable evidence at every step. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was a small, sterile room in the county courthouse. It smelled of old paper and floor polish. Brenda was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with a smarmy-looking lawyer who looked like he had gotten his degree from a television commercial. She was dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, a string of pearls around her neck. She was the very picture of a respectable community leader under siege. She had brought her 2 board member cronies with her, and they sat in the gallery behind her, ready to provide their perjured testimony. I sat at the defendant's table with Bob. I was wearing a simple gray suit. I had our 3 binders stacked neatly in front of me. I felt no nervousness, only a calm procedural certainty. The outcome was preordained. We were just going through the necessary steps. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, entered the room and called the case. Brenda's lawyer began. He painted a picture of his client, as a selfless public servant, working tirelessly to protect her community. He described me as a disgruntled, aggressive old man, unable to accept the lawful decisions of the HOA. He claimed I had engaged in a campaign of harassment, culminating in the terrifying incident on Brenda's doorstep. Then Brenda took the stand. It was the performance of a lifetime. Her voice trembled. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She described how she feared for her life when I alunga at her. She spoke of my unsettling habit of filming her. She presented the wall as a vital safety measure, unanimously approved by the board for the good of all. She was, in her telling, a victim. When it was Boba's turn to cross-examine, the tone in the room shifted. He was polite, almost gentle. At first, Mrs. Vickers, he began. You stated that Mr. Finch lunged at you on your doorstep. Can you describe that? He came right at me, she said, her voice breathy. He was very angry. He shoved a letter in my face. I see, Bob said. We'd like to play a short audio recording for the court. This was captured by Mr. Finch on the day in question. He played the recording from my shirt pocket. The courtroom was silent, listening to the calm exchange. My quiet, this is a formal notice, her snatching the paper. The sound of it ripping. Her angry, hissing voice. I don't take orders from you, you old fool. Then my voice again, calm as ever. I thank you, her confused. I thank you for what? And my final damning line. For confirming receipt of the notice and for providing me with another piece of evidence demonstrating your bad faith. The courtroom was dead silent. Brenda's face had gone pale. Her lawyer was shuffling papers, avoiding the judge's gaze. Mrs. Vickers, Bob continued, his voice now like ice. Does that sound like a man who is lunging at you? Or does it sound like a woman illegally destroying a legal notice and a man calmly documenting it? She stammered. The recording has been edited. It is deceptive. It has been submitted to a forensic analyst who will testify that it has not been altered in any way. Bob said flatly, let us move on. You claimed the wall was a necessary safety measure. What specific safety incidents prompted its construction? There were many near-misses, she said, grasping for her narrative. With the mowers and the traffic. Bob placed a document on the projector. It was the leaked minutes. These are the minutes from your emergency board meeting, are they not? Please read the justification you provided to the board. Brenda stared at the screen, her eyes wide with panic. She had no idea we had this. She was trapped. She mumbled the line about several near-miss accidents. And yet, Bob said at the sheriff. Report from 2 days later, when you called them to Mr. Tand. Finch's property contains a statement from you. In it you make no mention of safety. You claim only that the land is HOA property. Why the change in story, Mrs. Vickers? She had no answer. Her carefully constructed facade was cracking. But Bob was just getting started. He had her admit the wall was built on land that the new survey proved was mine. He had her admit she had received my certified letters and refused them. With every question, he was not just defending me. He was methodically building a case against her for perjury, malicious prosecution, and abuse of process. The final act was my testimony. I didn't need to say much. Bob simply had me identify the exhibits one by one. The deed, the survey, the photos, and finally the drainage easement. Bob addressed the judge. Your Honor, this is the crux of the matter. The restraining order is a frivolous and malicious tactic to cover up a far more serious issue. By building this wall, Mrs. Vickers and the HOA have not only violated my client's property rights, they have breached a 30-year-old recorded covenant. This easement, he said, pointing to the document on the screen. IEs, the only thing that provides storm drainage for a significant portion of the Lakeside Meadows subdivision. The terms of the easement are clear. Obstruction of my client's driveway gives him the right to terminate the easement and seal the pipe. In short, Your Honor, in her petty attempt to bully a quiet homeowner, Mrs. Vickers has put the entire community at risk of catastrophic flooding and exposed the HOA to millions of dollars in potential liability. He let that hang in the air. The judge read the easement clause on the screen. She read it again. Then she looked at Brenda Vickers. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. The mask didn't just slip from Brenda's face. It shattered. The performative confidence, the righteous indignation, the practiced victimhood, all evaporated in an instant. She was left with nothing but the blank, hollow-eyed panic of someone who has flown too close to the sun and just felt her wax wings melt. She stared at the document on the screen, then at me, her mouth slightly agape. In that moment, she finally understood. She understood the file. She understood the receipts. She understood the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had brought a knife to a battle of legal artillery, and the first shell had just landed directly on her head. The collapse was total. It was not loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, internal implosion. She just sat there, frozen at the plaintiff's table, as Judge Miller delivered her ruling. The request for a temporary restraining order is denied, the judge said, her voice ringing with finality. Moreover, I find that this action was brought frivolously, maliciously, and in bad faith. It is an abuse of the judicial process, intended to harass the defendant and conceal the plaintiff's own illegal actions. She looked directly at Brenda, Mrs. Vickers. Your testimony was not credible. In fact, it bordered on perjury. This court does not take kindly to being used as a weapon in a neighborhood squabble, particularly when one party has so clearly and deliberately violated the law. The judge was not finished. Furthermore, she continued, based on the evidence presented by the defendant, I am issuing an immediate injunction on my own authority. The Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association is hereby ordered to remove the illegal structure from Mr. Finch's property within 48 hours. The cost of this removal is to be borne entirely by the HOA. I am also awarding Finch his full attorney's fees and costs associated with defending against this frivolous action. Mr. Stern, submit your billing to the court. She banged her gavel. We are adjourned. Brenda did not move. Her lawyer was frantically packing his briefcase, eager to escape the carnage. Her two cronies from the gallery were already slinking out the door, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Bob gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. That, he said with immense satisfaction. Is what we call a complete victory. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Brenda. The news of the court order spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. An emergency HOA meeting was called. That weekend, a proper one this time. With the required notice, the clubhouse was packed. George Henderson and I walked in together. This time, there were no glares. People nodded at me. A few came up to shake my hand. The fear was broken. Brenda and her lawyer were there. But the dynamic had completely changed. She was no longer a queen addressing her subjects. She was a defendant facing her accusers. One by one, people stood up. Mr. Henderson spoke about the basketball hoop. The Garcia spoke about the political sign. A dozen other homeowners, emboldened by my victory, stood up and shared their own stories of her bullying, her arbitrary fines, her reign of petty terror. The anonymous emails I had received were now voices in a room, united and strong. Carol, the board member who had leaked the minutes, stood up and formally resigned from the board, stating she could no longer be a party to Mrs. Vickers' abuses. Then she made a motion for the immediate recall of Brenda Vickers as president. It was seconded by a dozen voices at once. The vote was nearly unanimous. She was stripped of her title, right there, front of the community she had tried to rule. She and her husband left the meeting without a word, their faces pale with rage and humiliation. They put their house up for sale a week later. The legal and financial consequences were just as severe. Bob submitted his invoice to the court, and the judge signed the order making Brenda and the HOA jointly liable for just over $20,000 in legal fees. A contractor was hired to demolish the wall. I stood on my patio with a fresh cup of coffee and watched them take it down, block by block. It took them less than 4 hours. I sent the bill as directed by the court to the HOA. The board, now under the interim leadership of a relieved and somewhat surprised George Henderson, had to face the music. They had to pay my legal fees and the demolition costs out of the HOA's reserve funds, which required a special assessment on all the homeowners. An angry letter went out explaining why every 1A's dues were going up because the former president had engaged in illegal activity that resulted in a massive court-ordered judgment. Brenda's reputation was destroyed, but the masterstroke was the drainage easement. Bob, on my behalf, sent a formal letter to the new board. It didn't threaten, it simply stated the facts. The covenant had been breached. My right to terminate the easement was now active. However, the letter continued. I was a reasonable man. I had no desire to see my neighbors' properties flooded. Therefore, I was willing to offer a forbearance. In exchange for a payment of $1, I would agree not to exercise my right to terminate the easement, provided that the HOA formally record a new document, drafted by my attorney, reaffirming my property rights in perpetuity and acknowledging the HOA's fault in the matter. It also required them to formally rescind every fine Brenda had issued over the last 2 years and refund the money to the homeowners. They agreed instantly. They had no choice. The alternative was unthinkable. A week later, George Henderson came to my house with a check for $1 and the signed agreement. We shook hands. The war was over. In the months that followed, a quiet healing began in Lakeside Meadows. The new board, led by George, went through the covenants and rescinded all of Brenda's petty, overreaching rules. The atmosphere at the pool changed from a cliquey court to a friendly gathering place. People started talking to each other again. The Garcias put a new sign in their yard. Mr. Henderson's grandkids put the basketball hoop back up. Sarah and I took another trip to the coast. This time, when I came home, my driveway was clear. The asphalt was clean. The only thing marking the spot where the wall had been was a faint line of pale dust, and even that was fading. I parked my car in my garage, something I hadn't been able to do for weeks. It felt good. It felt right. I still have the folder. It sits in my desk drawer, a thick silent testament to the whole affair. Sometimes I take it out and look through it. The photos, the receipts, the certified letters, the court orders. Ites, not a monument to victory. Ites, a lesson. A lesson about the difference between power and authority. Brenda had power, the temporary, performative power of a title and a clipboard. But she had no real authority, because her power wasn't grounded in rules or fairness. It was grounded in her own ego. My authority in the end came from a surveyor's pin, a recorded deed, and a 30-year-old clause on page 87 of a dusty report. It was quiet, unseen, and absolute. I think about ownership. What does it mean to own something? It is not just a name on a piece of paper. It is a responsibility. A responsibility to the history of the land, to the rules that govern it, and to the community that surrounds it. Brenda thought ownership was about control. I have come to believe it is about stewardship. Eleanor would have liked that. She was the one who taught me that a home is more than just a structure. It is a place of peace, A sanctuary. And a sanctuary is worth defending. This morning I sat on my patio, drinking my coffee from the same ceramic mug. It was 6:42 a.m. The only sounds were the drip of the coffee maker and the chittering of sparrows in the old oak tree. The sound was right again. Everything was in its proper place. Order had been restored, and the peace was deeper, more profound, because it had been earned. On paper,